right, here we go. So Simon Brace is a friend of SUC, this church, for a good number of years. We've had some key speakers over the years who have been wonderful. We've learnt a lot, and he's really assisted us, Simon, so we're grateful you're here again. He is a fisherman. I'm going to mention his children to you. You can count how many he has. Eva, Olivia, Kai, Giannis, Ruben. He's a 5-children man, married to Nell. Homeschooling, Simon? Wife's doing it, yeah. So your role in that is?
My role is to teach the kids how to clean the yard.
Okay, to clean the yard. And they have a cattle dog called Helmer. Yes. Yes. And Simon claims he's caught the biggest bronze bream.
That's the rumor.
But is this another of your unverified claims, Simon? This is about truth.
Like we do Professor Rotek with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, yeah.
Yes. So Simon is the National Director of Ratio Christi, South Africa, and also serves as the Chapter Director at Northwest University in Potch, born in Zim. Yeah. Yes. And he moved to South Africa when he completed his matric, gained a diploma in land surveying from Durban University of Tech. Simon also holds a BA in Theology and an MA in Apologetics and Philosophy from Southern Evangelical Seminary. And he was part of the founding and establishment of Ratio Christi while working in Southern at the university. And he served as its president and chair. And he's a member now. So loves talking to young people. We had a great time last night. So let's welcome Simon. Cool.
There we go. All right, thanks, Murray. Thank you for the introduction. And it's always good to be back in the Eastern Cape and to visit with our friends here. And we had a great event last night. And myself and Professor Rodseth, we always, in recent years, we pretty much speak on this topic most all of the time because it's such a pressing issue of our times. And what's interesting about it is how there's a lot going on here. And even last night, it was interesting to me how everybody knows about BLM, okay? But when you actually press people for what that's all about, like last night everybody knew who BLM was, nobody really understands what they actually stand for. They think they actually stand for something, but when you begin to understand what's going on, I think at a deeper level, you realize BLM is actually substantively got little to do with black lives at a fundamental level. It's about something fundamentally different. And that was interesting to me last night, how everybody's aware of that. Anyway, so we're involved with a campus ministry called Ratio Christi. We have a website, ratiochristi.co.za, which you can go and visit. We have a lot of free articles on that and free ebooks. I want to draw your attention specifically to the orange one there, which is written specifically for students at universities. The authors actually have recently published a book on this issue, a more substantive text called Critical Dilemma: The Rise of Critical Theories and Social Justice Ideology, Implications for the Church and Society. This would be a much more deeper dive into the issue. And just got that, just haven't read it yet. But you can take that. We also have a YouTube channel with lots of interviews with scholars on all kinds of topics. But yeah, let's dive in now. What is woke, and why does the nuclear family have to go? I am going to begin by jumping on a landmine. And I just start right out the gate with BLM. Because my own journey in understanding this thing has been a process of reading some of the literature for and against and thinking about this. But I remember my first moment of cognitive dissonance when BLM rose on the global scene and everybody was out in arms and correctly protesting to what happened to George Floyd in America. But then what was odd about Black Lives Matter is they were also talking about their contempt for the nuclear family. And I couldn't put those two things together. I can understand why you might be opposed to racism, but why are you hating on the family? That made no sense to me. But as we're going to find out this morning, as we dive into this, you're going to see why these two things come together. Is what is the relationship between racism and anti-family? So there's something up. Something's going on in the culture today for anybody who's paying attention. We are now finding in ourselves where we're all being pressed or coerced at some level, I would argue a stronger word, to believe things that most of us don't take to be true. And the world kind of moves on, and you're expected to go along with these things. And if you don't, there's now a threat that comes along with this. And where are these kinds of demands being made? Well, they're being made in the sports field. Is this the future of women's athletics when men can compete against girls? We saw the recent fiasco in the boxing at the Olympics in France. Conceptions of marriage. This is old school. In fact, in some countries, to even question this would be to earn yourself the title of being a bigot or a hater. Concepts of sexuality, whether it's the gender-bred person or the gender unicorn. What's that all about? Our understanding of gender. Professor Rodseth just addressed these issues there. What do we do with an advertising sign with a hairy bloke stuck in women's lingerie on it, where it says, "For every woman, we mean every"? Rachel just spoke about this concept of sexuality with respect to kids. Apparently, kids understand what their gender is from a very young age, and you're meant to affirm them. And as a result of all of these changes, we have to change the signs on our toilet doors now, because we have to have new symbols to represent the other identities that exist. The language is also being manipulated. There's a whole lot of new language, and I believe we have a contingent of students here from Rhodes University that you have to be conversant with. New words that are kind of confusing to us all. There's no longer breastfeeding, it's chest feeding. Okay? And on the list goes. And of course, it's going to the streets. This is all going to the streets globally. And you would be wrong to think that this isn't happening in South Africa. In fact, in many respects, South Africa is shaping the debate. Our athletes have been used to make the arguments, albeit that these arguments are false, as Professor Rogers just demonstrated. We are reading the same scholars. I can't find much scholarship that's, I would argue, authentically African, and I'm going to argue for that now. We're using the same icons, appealing to the same arguments, and indeed, part of this movement involved tearing down statues. And the tearing down of statues began, first of all, in South Africa. Okay? I often ask people which was the first university to have a statue taken down on, and people will go, oh, it was UCT. It wasn't. It was Northwest University. You know, the conservative school that everybody thinks all the conservative people go to, and it's very conservative and posh. Nothing could be further from the truth. Potchefstroom University is not conservative in any way, shape, or form. Okay? So the Fallist movement was a part of this now. I was actually at Rhodes when this event happened. I saw some unfortunate stuff happening on the campus then. When you are dealing with the corporate world, if diversity, equity, and inclusion has become part of your drive now and to get consultants and to deal with this, know this, that this philosophy is right there. It's happening at our universities where when you mess around with pronouns, be rest assured this thing is there. Here we find the University of Pretoria coaching students in the new pronouns, z's, zers, zems. Stellenbosch University, there we see the new symbols on the toilet doors. And of course, it's happening for our high school kids as well. If you want to be a popular matric student, then play around with the concept of androgyny, even if you have no idea what that's about. And you become very, very famous very quickly. And if you think it's only happening in white culture, you'll be wrong. Think about this, Eastern Cape teen who lives as trans woman to undergo traditional initiation into manhood. But the truth is, most of us are kind of here. We're kind of like our cricket team. We think there's something going on. Some guys think this is about racism and are pretty convinced it is. Some guys are not quite sure, so they're kind of halfway there. They're kind of, well, I'll raise my fist, but I won't bend my knee. Some guys are just awkward looking at the ground, standing there. Some guys don't want to show up. And if you don't show up, here's the coercion, you don't get to play cricket. The truth is, we're all here. You're all here. Something's going on. We've been forced to believe some stuff. We think it's about this, and some people, but we don't really know. And there's good reason for this, because this thing has been driven by a very subversive philosophy. The person who helped me to understand a good section of this was a guy by the name of Douglas Murray. He's a British journalist, and he wrote 2 books, The Strange Death of Europe and The Madness of Crowds. In his first book, he talks about the strange death of Europe, which is an odd title. But I think in the second book, The Madness of Crowds, he unpacks why would Europe be dying today. And he says, we are being asked to believe things that are unbelievable and being told not to object to things such as giving children drugs to stop them going through puberty, which most people feel a strong objection to. The pain that comes from being expected to remain silent on some important matters and perform impossible leaps on others is tremendous, not least because the problems, including the internal contradictions, are so evident. As anyone who has lived in totalitarianism can attest, there is something demeaning and eventually soul-destroying about being expected to go along with claims you do not believe to be true and cannot hold to be true. He then goes on to say this, which really kind of magnifies my talk down to this. He says, we're going through a great crowd derangement in public and in private. Both online and off, people are behaving in ways that are increasingly irrational, feverish, herd-like, and simply unpleasant. The daily news cycle is filled with the consequences. Yet while we see the symptoms everywhere, we do not see the causes. You are all bumping into this at some level everywhere all the time. The rainbow flags, the Olympics now, the media in your face. Wherever it is, the diversity and equity inclusion demands within our corporate machines and this. So we're bumping into this, but what's causing all of this? Well, in some sense, it's actually quite easy to understand why we're here, because as the kinds of beings we are, rational animals, we are a function of the ideas that grip us. So you want to understand human behavior, find out what ideas that group has, and it'll explain why they behave like they do. Okay? So ideas have consequences, and we can have different kinds of ideas with different kinds of consequences. These guys had an idea that led to this contraption, and some decades later we had these kinds of contraptions. This is an idea, making manifest. This guy has a lot of ideas now, and he's ended up with these electric vehicles. Okay? This man had an idea. This man took that idea, and you got a bit of that. This man has some ideas. We can talk a lot about him. And this chap and that chap took those ideas, and we got a little bit of this and a little bit of that. So now we see ideas having consequences now. It's a fundamental dimension of human beings, is what are the ideas that they have. This man's ideas had a huge implications for the people of America during the Civil Rights Movement. This man's ideas had huge implications for the people of India, and of course we all are living in the consequences of this man's ideas. Here in South Africa, this is Verwoed. So what I'm going to do in this talk is I'm going to expose these ideas. I'm going to unmask this thing so that you no longer are in the dark about this. You're no longer bumping into the furniture. You actually know what's going on and why the furniture has been moved in the first place. Just like Ratio helped give us those distinctions, so now we can make some important distinctions between this. We need to now understand what is driving this. And here's the bottom line. Your lives, our lives, are being governed by these people. Not Cyril, not the South African government, not the EU, not the global powers. Our lives are being governed by these people. Who are these people? These are your social justice scholars. They are the intellectual elites of our universities, and all ideas that are driving things in the West now are affected by them. Economic, political, social, you name it. Education, every single sphere of society is being fundamentally influenced by these folks and their books. They write the script. Everybody else just are actors. But if you read their literature, and these are some of the famous social justice scholars, we have some who focus in specific areas, like on sexuality, for example, with Judith Butler. On the issues of race, you've got D'Angelo, Ibrahim X. Kendi. In law, with critical race theory, you'd have Kimberly Crenshaw with her work, for example. You've got education with the guy on the bottom there with the beard, Paulo Freire. But the most important picture is the black and white one there, because there we have arguably the most famous feminist alive today, Angela Davis, being discipled by Herbert Marcuse. That's important because when you read their literature, and I've read a fair amount of it, I found very little substantial philosophy, that is, new philosophy. They simply are putting their concepts on the back of the philosophy of these guys. Okay, and what's pretty clear from this now? Well, apart from Frantz Fanon in the bottom corner there, with a black trim, they're all white European men. Who are these people? I put the trim around it. These people are, for the most part, in the red trim, are all the people who followed Karl Marx's philosophy. From Antonio Gramsci to the Frankfurt School, you might have heard of that. These guys were all socialists and communists, and many of them left Europe and had to leave Europe because of the fascists and ended up taking their philosophy to the American universities. The bottom left-hand corner are your French existentialists. What do they have in common with these other guys? They drink from the same philosophy, and they're also Marxists. What does Fanon have in common with them? Whilst he's ethnically African, he's distinctively un-African in his philosophy. He's an old-school, Bolshevik kind of a Marxist, okay, with a large dose of French existentialism thrown in for good measure. The foreword to his book was written by Jean-Paul Sartre. So what's going on here? Fundamentally, we are all wallowing and subject to the philosophy of German idealism. This is the fundamental philosophy. It's coming off of the back of Kant and into Hegel. This is the philosophical worldview or framework driving all of the thinking at our universities in just about every single department. So you can take an Angela Davis or anybody else who's writing now and work backwards in a timeline, and you will bump into these figures along the way. And it bottoms out to a large extent in the dialectic of Hegel. Of course, we know Karl Marx was a young Hegelian. And at the center of this battle are the concepts and ideas of Karl Marx. And so we've got to say a few things about him, just very briefly. What did Karl Marx believe? Well, he believed that the problem in society was that there was disparity between people. At a fundamental level, for him, it was an economic disparity. And the reason why there's disparity is because, according to Karl Marx, there is oppression. And the oppression is caused by oppressors. And so who were the oppressors? They had a fancy word for it. Those were the bourgeoisie. They controlled the means of production, and they oppressed the proletarians. And so what we were waiting for is through his philosophy, which he thought was like a science, we were going to have a revolution where eventually the proletarians would rise up, and we would have a dictatorship of the proletarians, and we would have an overthrowing of the bourgeoisie culture. Okay? And he said a few other things as well. His concept of alienation. He believed that the existing ideologies of the day oppressed people and dehumanized them because we had turned people in the Industrial Revolution into things by putting them in factory number 7, on production line number 4, putting bolt number 3 into engine block number 16, and you did that your whole life, and then you expired. You never saw the benefits of your own labor and hand and profits. That all went to the fat capitalist people, and so down with capitalism. So he believed that ultimately a revolution is inevitable, and we're moving ultimately through these various phases economically towards ultimately the utopia of communism. Okay? Importantly, he gets and is profoundly influenced, not in terms of just the Hegelian framework, which is his operating philosophy, but he's also influenced in his views of religion by Feuerbach. This man is extremely important for two reasons. He influences both Marx and Freud. Okay? With respect to religion, he believed that God was a construct of the mind, a projection of the mind. You Christians invented the concept of God as some kind of psychological way of dealing with reality. And any other concept tied to that was also simply an invention of your mind. And so I was familiar with this quote of Marx, but never really understood it. But this is Marx's view of religion. He said, religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, and the soul of soulless conditions. It is the opium of the people. Well, what does opium do to a person? Opium dulls your faculties. And so religion dulls your faculties as well. It makes you kind of doped up and makes you vulnerable to being exploited by the capitalists because you don't really see things as you ought to see them. You're kind of in this hazy kind of place, vulnerable to exploitation. You're an oppressed creature if you're a religious person. And so what Marx believed is we need to shift people from that predicament okay, to a predicament of understanding what's really going on, to really have a critical consciousness apart from a false consciousness. And this shift from false consciousness to critical consciousness is what woke is. That's just what it is. To be woke is to understand the world and its issues and oppression as a Marxist would understand them. Bottom line, that's what that is. That's what that means. It's an appropriation, it's an imperialization of social issues in which those who call for this move are saying that all issues in society need to be understood through a Marxist framework and all solutions also attended to through a Marxist framework. That much is clear. And you can read the literature yourself. I mean, you can pick up Sophie Lewis. You can go back from her through to, in the feminist movement, through Shulamith Firestone's Dialectic of Sex. Down further back than that, you can go to Marcuse, and you'll bump into Karl Marx and the Communist Manifesto. So, for those of you who are willing to do the homework, you can do this. It takes a little bit of time, but it can be done. The books aren't particularly intimidating. They're pretty thin. And they're thin in more than just one way. Yeah. Yes. All right, so what's going on? Let's do some history now. So Marx comes up with his philosophy in the 1800s, but he never gets to see it implemented. It's left to the Bolsheviks. 1917, middle of the First World War, Europe's in a terrible nihilistic war, 17 million people dead, trench warfare. Europeans are going, maybe we want out of this nightmare, and there's suddenly a revolution in the middle of this war in Russia, and people going, look, maybe there's a new thing happening here. Maybe this is going to give us some hope, because they needed some hope. And so all of these Marxists in Europe are fawning over the good fortune that's befallen the Russians, who are now being liberated. But unfortunately what happened is Marxism didn't spill across into Europe then. It kind of went the way of China pretty early, but it didn't go to Europe. And so then these European Marxists were going, why isn't Marxism gripping here? We were ripe for this revolution to unfold here. And then along came people like Antonio Gramsci and said, maybe Marx was correct at some level, but maybe his critique was too narrow. And so he thought what we could do is expand Marx's critique beyond just the issue of oppression within class and economics, but to other issues. And so he argued that Europe was calcified because all the institutions in Europe, were entrenched with a worldview, that being Christianity, and that prevented the revolution from happening. So we had to break that. And he coined the concept or this idea of hegemony, that we need to break the hegemony and in the institutions. So he argued that the rule of the dominant group is achieved by the spread of ideologies, belief, and assumptions through institutions such as schools, churches, courts, the many others. These institutions do the work of socializing people into norms, values, and beliefs. So you have to get into those institutions and take them over, to displace them. And so in some sense, this is a kind of a graphic of what's going on. If you wanted political revolution, you've got to first have a cultural revolution. How do you do that? To get into all the institutions and displace the existing value system with a Marxist ideology. So how do you do that? You go upstream to the institutions that traffic in ideas. Quite simple, very effective. These are all the institutions that govern society, but the ones in red are the most important because those are the ones that traffic in ideas. And so if you can get into the universities and into the churches and into the family, then you will get the culture. That's a cultural Marxism. Antonio Gramsci, I would say, is the father of the modern day woke movement. And I could have saved you a lot of time because he did a nice thing and he summarized the whole affair with this statement. He said, socialism is precisely the religion that must overwhelm Christianity. In the new order, socialism will triumph by first capturing the culture via infiltration of schools, universities, and churches, and the media by transforming the consciousness of society. So there's the shift from false consciousness to critical consciousness. How? By infiltrating all the institutions. Now, many of you might never have heard of any of this before. I hadn't. This is why I'm saying to you, this thing is subversive. Because it's never fed to you like this. This is how it's typically fed to us in popular culture. Do you have some sound? Oh, sorry, let's just wait a second now. Sorry. Let me just, oh, sorry, I do have a jack here. We'll put jack into the computer. I want you to listen carefully to this, to not, the images are powerful. Oh, there I go, I just messed that up. We'll try again. Just listen to the content, not just the images. The images are powerful, but listen to the content. Sorry, I'm just trying to find my cursor. Getcha.
We're never alone. And that is our strength. Because when we're doubted, we'll play as one. When we're held back, the sport. We know things won't always go.
Lost the audio there, unfortunately, and we're not going to have time to visit again. But that is pretty captivating. I mean, you're stuck here on a Saturday morning listening to some grumpy old bald Zimbabwean, and I've got to compete against Nike. And so are your young kids. That thing is just raw propaganda. In it says we're going to do something new here. Okay? You've got the imagery from COVID there. And you see the standard imagery, the BLM, the us versus them. Somebody's going to stop us. If we can't fit the sport, we're going to change the sport. The LGBTQ flag, the token Muslim is always there because nobody wants to criticize Islam. You can say what you want about Christianity, but you dare not say that the Muslims have an issue. This stuff gets pumped out there 24/7, 365. And it's intoxicating. Note, no mention of Karl Marx, no mention of Hegel, no mention of Judith Butler. They don't need to. They just need you to know there's BLM. What about it? Who knows? It's kind of this thing, but we've got to be on board. This is how this stuff is fed to the generation. And for the most part, most of the churches and church leadership don't know what to do with it. And so we're stuck with it. And I could give you many other ads that prove that this is what's going on. So let's return to Black Lives Matter. Why is Black Lives Matter both anti-racist and anti-family? Well, it's because they're Marxists. They are trained Marxists. And what they are doing is, to their credit, they're consistent Marxists because the hating of the family has a long history. And it didn't really begin with them. It begins with Karl Marx himself in the Communist Manifesto. So if you want to be a good BLM person, you're also going to have to be a hater of the family. That's what it said. Why? Because the guy who's your foundation wrote the book that said to him, the family is the problem. Look at these statements here from Karl Marx. Abolition of the family, even the most radical flare-up at this infamous proposal of the communists. Do you charge us with wanting to stop the exploitation of children by their parents? We're going to visit this issue. To this crime we plead guilty. We're going to save the children from their oppressive parents. The bourgeois claptrap about the family and education, about the hallowed correlation of parents and child becomes all the more disgusting. Yeah, because that's a high view of family, Carl. This is the philosophy of our age. What is the philosophy on our campuses that's been pushed now? It's critical theory. It's the philosophy of Karl Marx. It's the Marxification of all our educational systems from the top down in all departments. Don't think that if you're in an engineering department, you're going to get away with this, because ultimately you're going to be subjected to diversity, equity, and inclusion training, so you will sit at their feet as well. So all these new topics that have been invented on our campuses is just an expression of these things, whether it's decolonization conversations in history, critical pedagogy in education, critical race theory and legal studies, diversity, equity, and inclusion within the corporate world. This is what this is. What is it? Vodi Bakum does, I think, this thing's a Trojan horse, that's what it is. It comes in appearing to be one thing, but ultimately what you find out is actually there's badness in it for you. Now, this is kind of a radical statement, but what's helpful is basically you can get a lot of this stuff online. So we can actually go to the leaders of the social justice movement. In this case, we're going to listen to this feminist, where they publish books about this. Where Karl Marx calls for the abolition of family, she writes a book in contemporary parlance called Abolish the Family, a manifesto for care and liberation. Sophie Lewis, let's listen to what she has to say here. Listen carefully.
Liberation of relationships of care, not a kind of destruction of the relationships we already have. Capitalism and capitalist states rely really heavily on the family as a unit of social discipline, social order, austerity, and a source of huge amounts of unpaid labor. In the history of feminism, abolishing the family was, very well known as a demand, particularly in the 60s and 70s amongst certain strands of women's liberation, including Shulamith Firestone's famous The Dialectic of Sex, where she talks about children's liberation and a world in which children and women would have much more autonomy over the households in which they live. It's feminists who have mounted an analysis of the private nuclear household as the site of the overwhelming majority of the rape and abuse that takes place on Earth. Family abolition means that we deserve more. We deserve more than the sort of blackmail that tells us that we must be content with relationships defined as blood or as nature, the relationships we find given to us. It means that we could develop forms of comradeliness, forms of chosen, or in the phrase of the xenofeminists, sort of xenofam. Xenofam can be as good as, at least as good as, relationships of sort of biological or biogenetic nature. So that's one way of thinking about abolition as a process of building and growing all the kind of forms of love and care and solidarity that we deserve.
So which is the institution responsible for the vast majority of rape and abuse in society? Family. Which is the institution that props up capitalism? The family, which means that has to go. So we've got to come up with new conceptions of family, comradeliness, according to the xenofeminists, because we've been blackmailed into thinking that the traditional family is a good idea, when actually, if you really are a Marxist and you're woke and you really understand social constructs, you realize that the family is ultimately the problem. So what props up the economic disparity? The family. So what's the problem then? Ultimately, the chief institution that needs to be torn down is the family. They've got the universities. They want to get the church. How do you get the church? You feed them liberation theology. And how do you get the family? You just redefine it. This is the spiritual war that we're on. This is the cultural war that we're in at the moment. So how do you abolish the family? I've identified these points. You attack biology. You attack the concept of man. You attack the concept of parental responsibility. We've already seen that with Karl Marx's statement. You attack the innocence of children. You attack the concept of women. You attack the concept of sex. You make sex political. And finally, you attack the life of the unborn. Let's start then. Attacking biology. In Engels' work, Marx and Engels wrote a lot together. We already see this concept coming through. Engels observed that the original division of labor was between man and woman for the purposes of child breeding, and that within the family, the husband was the owner. the wife, the means of production. Yeah, my wife, man, we means of production there. And my children, I've got 5, so I am a wealthy man, 5 lovely slaves in my house, and that the reproduction of the human species was this is a nonsense. I sometimes have to stop myself and think that this stuff is actually taken seriously in our universities. What a load of hogwash. Gosh. Sorry, I had to have a little outburst there. What a low view of human beings. And this is the intellectual high ground in our universities? What a load of nonsense. Well, of course, the feminists pick up on this, and they say to you, well, you know, Marx was right, but he didn't really understand it because he's a man, and only women really understand the world, and so they've got a deeper analysis. And this is where they attack the concept of man and biology. She says there's a deeper level of reality. It's not economics that's the problem. It's actually our sex that's the problem. There's an unequal distribution of power there. The final quote's the important one. Thus, the triumph of the patriarchate was neither a matter of chance nor the result of violent revolution. From humanity's beginning, their biological advantage has enabled males to affirm their status. That's right. Because men physiologically are stronger than women, we are the oppressors. The fundamental concept to feminism. They are raging against what at this point? Against biology. I always wondered what the feminists were kind of so mad about. They're mad about nature, reality. This, by the way, if you want to understand feminism, it's much more digestible than contemporary feminist literature. She writes really clearly. I disagree with just about every single page, but you can at least follow her. Trying to read other feminist literature, you need to take drugs before you understand that stuff, okay? But she's at least clear, helpful, and in some sense prophetic. So this is where we get down with the patriarchy. And of course, I'm going to give you examples now in South Africa. So when I make my argument there that they're tearing down the family, I'm going to show you how they're doing it in our own country. Not just say it's over there, it's right here. Here's UCT, beyond the binary. Disrupting gender, decolonization, this is the sleight of hand. Of course, all of this is passed off as being a great act of transformation or decolonization. It's anything but that. It's out with colonialism and in with another European philosophy called Marxism. Hegelian Marxism, to be precise. Decolonization necessarily requires degendering, really? So before the white guy showed up here in South Africa, all Africa was this androgynous utopia? I mean, I'm not an expert on African culture, but I'm pretty sure that black people don't believe that. Pretty sure of that. Here's that conservative school, straight out of curriculum, Northwest University, third-year education students, understanding the world. How do we understand it? We feed them critical theory. We feed them more Karl Marx. This is the philosophy coming into all public and private schools in South Africa, whether you like it or not. What do? They adopt the French existentialists, Jean-Paul Sartre's existence precedes essence distinction, because this props up the feminists, and you need the feminists in there, so you've got to feed them some Jean-Paul Sartre. Attacking parental responsibility. This is one of some of the most reprehensible stuff I've ever read. Willem Reich, another Marxist, talked about this. How do I oppress my children? By teaching them the ethics of Jesus Christ, the sexual ethics of Jesus. Here I do it. Suppression of the natural sexuality of the child, particularly of its genital sexuality, makes the child apprehensive, shy, obedient, afraid of authority, good and adjusted in the authoritarian sense. It paralyzes the rebellious forces because any rebellion is laden with anxiety. It produces, by inhibiting sexual curiosity and sexual thinking in the child, a general inhibition of thinking and critical faculties. That's right. When I teach my boys about penises and what you should and should not be doing in public with them, okay, what am I doing? I'm beginning to suppress them, their natural I should leave them alone to themselves, because I'm going to suppress them. And what you want is you want revolutionaries. You want people who are rebels, who can throw a Molotov cocktail through a window. In brief, the goal of sexual suppression is that of producing an individual who is adjusted in the authoritarian order, that's just capitalism, and who will submit it in spite of all misery and degradation. There is your false consciousness. At first, the child has to adjust to the structure of the authority and minister state, the family. This makes it capable of later subordination. So when I teach sexual ethics to my boys and my wife teach to my girls what it means to be a woman and deal with our sexual components, and we are doing what? We are suppressing them, and so are you. And yeah, we get it in Northwest. Look at this slippery slime from Northwest University. Yeah. They all talk about social constructionism, but there's that one sentence. Furthermore, our parents and social groups taught us what social constructs are acceptable. You see, you learned this from the parents. But when you come to university and sit at the feet of us, our sages, you'll realize that's really oppressive. And you know these things you're struggling with sexually as a young person? Act on them. And anybody who tells you not to act on that, they're an oppressor. It's as simple as that, folks. Here we go. Let's take these two heroes of this contemporary movement. Both of these guys, criminals, should have been put in jail. But they are heroes, idolized by this philosophy. Alfred Kinsey says the only kind of sexual dysfunction are abstinence, celibacy, and delayed marriage. What do I teach my kids? Those three things, which means what? I'm teaching them something that's dysfunctional. Here we see it in Marxist literature. We must rescue children from the harmful influence of the family. What do you think is going on in our culture in South Africa now with these laws? A violation of parental rights. Because who knows what's best for your family? Not you, the government officials, who happen to be Marxists. And here we go, Stellenbosch University doing us all a great favor by publishing stuff like this and queer activism in South African education, disrupting cis heteronormativity in schools. Thank you, Stellenbosch University. That's very kind of you. Get into our schools and basically turn over all of these concepts. Attacking the concept of woman. Here we go.
Can you provide a definition for the word woman?
Can I provide a definition?
Mm-hmm.
No,
Yeah.
I can't.
You can't?
Not in
Okay.
this context.
So you
I'm not a
believe the
biologist.
meaning of the word woman is so unclear and controversial that you can't give me a definition?
Senator, in my work as a judge, what I do is I address disputes. If there's a dispute about a definition, people make arguments, and I look at the
All right.
law and I decide. So I'm not.
The fact that you can't give me a straight answer about something as fundamental as what a woman is underscores the dangers of the kind of progressive education that we are hearing about.
One of the top 9 justices in America can't give you a definition of what a woman is. My 6-year-old could give you a definition. But apparently, the highly enlightened state of our university says, if you think you can define what a woman is, you're an oppressor. Where does this come from? It comes from people like Judith Butler and this book here. This is the central book of the feminist movement today. Here it is. It's called Gender Trouble. She is the one who has defined for the rest of the world what it means to be a man and a woman, because they've won this debate. She says, it doesn't take her long, it's in the first page. Recently, the prevailing conception of the relationship between feminist theory and politics has come under challenge from within feminist discourse. The very subject of woman is no longer understood in stable or abiding terms. There is a great deal of material that not only questions the viability of the subject as the ultimate candidate for representation or indeed liberation, but there is very little agreement, after all, on what it is that constitutes or ought to constitute the category of woman. And that's why you cannot define what a woman is. Why? Because Judith Butler and her friends have written their peer-reviewed letters to each other, and they have said so. And here we have Stellenbosch University. This is, I think, is like last week. Pushing binaries, exploring trans womanhood. There's nothing new. Our universities are just copying and paste all this nonsense from the US and Europe, and then trying to pass it off as a great act of decolonization. Stellenbosch University, they have the same policy documents on social justice. It's the same game plan, just like Northwest University. And I suspect you're going to find exactly the same stuff in the curriculum at Nelson Mandela University, and I would suspect at Rhodes as well. Sorry to the Rhodes people there, but I think that that's the case. Maybe you can furnish me with some of your curriculum. I'd like to have a look. Anyway, let's get back to this now. If you can't define what a woman is, okay, then what follows from that? Well, it just takes you to page 7 in the same book. She says, if the immutable character of sex is contested, Perhaps this construct called sex is as culturally constructed as gender. Indeed, perhaps it was always already gender, with the consequence that the distinction between sex and gender turns out to be no distinction at all. There we go. Now we've moved from gender being a social construct to sex being a social construct. And we get to CSE. You've all heard about this. You've been bumping into this. Where do you think these concepts in our new curriculum are coming from? Well, our Department of Basic Education is thanking the US for funding the whole thing. They wrote the curriculum. They financed the people to come and help implement it. Wouldn't we want that? For somebody to show up here with billions of dollars who can come and run a new curriculum for us in our schools and teach African people the truth about penises and vaginas, because we've got no idea down here. You know, what are those things all about? We're not quite sure. But hey, the feminists can come and enlighten us. But it's all decolonization, apparently. Here we go. Really? Department of Basic Education. Funded where? From Belgium. They have a proxy that does the work for them, VVOB. All right? Supported by whom? Stellenbosch University. So much for decolonization. What does it have to do? Destroy the boundary, down with the binary, get rid of the binary. And all the concepts are here, all the categories in our education. This is the organization. You can go online and see them on South Africa. They are busy running a program out now in KZN, funded by the EU, USAID, and the Belgian government, to the tune of 20 million rand. This looks a lot like colonization to me. Thanked by the Department of Basic Education. I really appreciate that the role VVOB is playing, honestly. And it's not just the Europeans, it's the Americans. This organization does loads of work here in South Africa, outright international. What are they advocating for? The end of conversion practices in Africa. What does that mean by that? Well, they've done all their research here with their proxy organizations here in South Africa. These are them. They did research in 3 countries, and they did a study in South Africa with 333 people. And what is the problem? The problem is, a large problem is families and churches and people praying for people and that kind of thing. There it is then. The laying on of hands, prayer, practices against LGBT individuals increase with intensity from the moment of discovery, starting with family talks, progressing to counselors or prayer. What do they want to do? They want to pass laws in Africa like they have in Canada and New Zealand to say that when you as a pastor pray for somebody in this, it's going to be illegal. That's what's coming here. We are the first country to have a first formal, I think, application. It's not a bill yet on conversion therapy. It's coming. And here we have it. What does that lead to? Well, this is Northwest University. Large School Borsuk Primary has gender swap day. Here we go. Because it's only happening over there. Gender swap day. Get all the boys to dress in girls' clothes and all the girls to dress in boys' clothes. The parents thankfully stood up. But that's the problem. Don't worry, the government's going to get rid of your student governing bodies. That's the first thing they're going to do. That's why if you want to stand up against this, you're going to have to start participating in your schools. Show up at the meetings and say, what are you teaching my kids in those classes? I want to see the curriculum now. No, you're not teaching our kids that. You better do it now whilst you've got a chance. But hey, according to News 24, queer sex education is great for South Africans. And on we go, feeding them more African philosophy, because Michel Foucault was African and so was Jacques Derrida. I think not. And then add to that critical theory of the Brazilian, the Marxification of education through Paulo Freire, the Marxist. This little book governs all educational theory at all academic institutions. And if I'm wrong about that, I'd like to be shown that I'm wrong. But I can't find any institution in South Africa that curriculum isn't heavily determined and governed by this book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Feminist pedagogy, we have to make sure the feminists are there, but it's particular kinds of feminists. You can't have the TERFs because they've been given the boot, all right? We've got to have the fourth wave feminists, and we've got to start trafficking in this, and we need to start defining people not according to their character, but according to their identities. These are called matrix of oppression tables. This is what it means to be woke, is to think like this. So when you meet somebody, you have to judge them according to these categories. The social issues are in the middle: race, class, sex, heterosexism, religion, whether you're able, and these other issues, whether you're a colonist or not. And if you're on that side, then you are the bourgeoisie, you are the oppressor. And if you're on this side, you are the oppressed. Here's your Hegelian dialectic. Here's your Marxist framework. This is how everything is seen. Everything's understood. If you're on that side, and you're like me, you're white, you have some stuff, you're a normal guy, you're a heterosexual marriage, you're a Christian, you're kind of able-bodied, although balding, and you're a European, you should be running right now from me at a rate of knots. Notice, which religion is the oppressive religion? Christianity. Anybody who says you can reconcile BLM with Christianity, I defy them to do that just on the basis of these tables. Here's another one. Same thing. Issues on the outside. Here's your bourgeoisie on the left, your oppressors, and they are the oppressed. This is how they're training young people to think in South Africa now at our universities. This is to be woke. This is to be enlightened. Coming from Patricia Hill Collins. This is a book, the EFF, one of the top recommended reading books for the EFF is Patricia Hill Collins, and you'll find it in our curriculum as well. Now, think about this for a moment. You go to the Apartheid Museum in Joburg, and they have this powerful, because, we used to discriminate people on the basis of the color of their skin. Hey? Wow, it's interesting. Still got to keep doing that. But hey, hulle is die slim mense, hulle is die profs, they're at the universities. What a sad development. And this breaks my heart. Social justice. Of course we're interested in social justice. Any decent person wants social justice. But you know what? They never define for you what they mean by social justice. Our Constitution means social justice. They are co-opting social justice. They are appropriating these issues, and they are snatching the microphone out of everybody else's hands, and they're saying that these issues need to be understood through a Marxist framework, okay, and solutions sought through a Marxist framework. That's what's going on. It's the imperialization over these issues with a Marxist philosophy at bottom. That's what it is. And don't feed me Frantz Fanon or any one of these other guys, because when I read their literature, they're anything but African. Frantz Fanon is very clear in his book, Wretched of the Earth, very clear what he wants. Listen to this. In the order to triumph, the national revolution must be what? African? Tribal? No, socialist. He says, if its career is cut short, if the native bourgeoisie takes over power, the new state, in spite of its former sovereignty, remains in the hands of the imperialists. That is, if black people, finally rid themselves of the white guys, but then do not have a socialist revolution, it might as well just stay as an oppressed state of affairs. It must be a Marxist revolution and nothing short of that. And what does that require? It requires us to go and kick the people out, to deal with the oppressors. He gets this philosophy directly from Hegel's master-slave dialectic. And here he says it, talking about reconciliation. The Northwest University document draws its inspiration from Frantz Fanon. And I don't know what those dumb professors up there were thinking when they put that document together, because obviously none of them read Frantz Fanon, because he says in page 22, in the first days of the revolt, you must kill. To shoot down a European is to kill two birds with one stone, to destroy an oppressor and the man he oppresses at the same time. Our university is drawing inspiration from this stuff. Because you know what? This leads to truth and reconciliation. Slitting white European throats. But hey, it's our universities. Hulle is die slim mense daar. It carries on, attacking the children. This is the foundational paper to feminist literature, Gail Rubin's paper called Thinking Sex, a radical theory for the politics of sexuality. And we will see how radical it gets from here. The feminist literature is not original. They appeal to Willem Reich and Michel Foucault. It's not female ideas. It's French existentialism. They talk about this, Michel Foucault. They fawn over his bankrupt philosophy. This is important. She says, the new scholarship of sexual behavior has given sexual history and created a constructivist alternative to sexual essentialism. Professor Rods's talk was talking about this. Underlying this body of work is an assumption that sexuality is constituted in society and history and not biologically ordained. There we go. So long before Judith Butler wrote her nonsense, Gail Rubin had begun already to unpack this, though, in the middle 1980s. What is this ultimately driving towards? They want to make all these other sexual things normative, okay? And all these other categories. That's what they're seeking to do here. And they attack the concepts of sex. How radical is it? In this section of the paper, she's talking about a woman now. She says there was a woman by the name of Jacqueline Livingston, and she said she was an assistant at Cornell University, and she was fired in 1978 for exhibiting pictures of male nudes, including photographs of a 7-year-old son masturbating. She goes on to say this: it is easy to see someone like Livingston as a victim of the child porn wars. It is harder for most people to sympathize with actual boy lovers. Like communists and homosexuals in the 1950s, boy lovers are so stigmatized that it is difficult to find defenders for their civil liberties, let alone for their erotic orientation. Consequently, the police have feasted on them. Local police, the FBI, and watchdog postal inspectors have joined to build a huge apparatus whose sole aim is to wipe out the community of men who love underage youth. In 20 years or so, when some of the smoke is cleared, it will be much easier to show that these men have been the victims of a savage and undeserved witch hunt. What is she arguing for? That's right, pedophilia. This is the academic literature, folks. This is the top feminist scholarship. This is the foundational paper to queer theory and gender studies. She goes on to say this. Here's the North American Man-Boy Love Association, established in 1978. Still exists to this day. This stuff began with the French, by the way. Time 5 to wrap up. Okay, I'm going to land this airplane. I'm going to crash land this airplane. Okay, right. This is where this is going. We see this in the 1970s in France with Jean-Paul Sartre and these other guys. And of course, but we have it here in South Africa because we need queer lawfare in our universities, in our law schools, at the University of Pretoria. Back to the African culture. Andrew Murray Book Prize. You have to be gay to know God wins the Andrew Murray Book Prize. We see this bleeding into the church. They make it political. Who made it political? The 60s sexual revolution, Herbert Marcuse. It became political. They get this from Freud, because Freud believed that all things going in society are driven by some or other kind of sexual repression. And the Marxists thought, so now it's oppression on the basis of finances, it's cultural issues as well, but also you oppress me by trying to get me to conform to your constructivist Christian ethic, okay, on sexuality. That's the Freudian. And then the Marxists come and they bring Marx and Freud together. And that's why everything has become about sexuality in politics as well. The 60s sexual revolution was not just about a bunch of naughty kids who couldn't behave themselves. It was fundamentally a cultural revolution. So they bring Freud into that as well. We don't have time to make. What's the ultimate way to destroy the family? And the Russians, by the way, were the first to begin this. In 1920s, the Russian feminists, who were saying a lot of the stuff long before Simone de Beauvoir and the rest of them showed up on the scene, they used to call themselves progressives in the 1920s. They've already had this, and it didn't work out too well for them because they were the first nation to legalize abortion. They had a low view of family as well, so they atomized family, and they were the first country to start aborting children. 260 million abortions in Russia. So they've had this. Putin's laughing at Europe now. He says to them, you guys call yourself progressives? We used to call ourselves progressives in the 1920s. So you want to really destroy a family? What's that? Just do that to it. That'll end the family. This is the fundamental way to destroy family. And this is one of their sacred doctrines. You try and tell them that this is wrong and this is evil. They will form a mob and they will burn something down. What is that? That is the murder of a human being. That's exactly what that is. Now, you and I might not care about this. We might not want to pay any attention. But I know there is one person who sees all these things. And the wrath of God will come We are warned in Colossians and elsewhere. When we descend into this kind of stuff and lie to ourselves as we are doing about these things, don't worry about the bad guy climbing through your window. Wait when God visits you and he brings you down, and he will bring any nation down. When you start trafficking in this kind of stuff, he is going to go and read Psalm 2. He is coming to destroy you, and he will destroy us. Make no mistake. What has happened? Colossians 2. It says there, it warns us, see to it that no one takes you captive by philosophy and empty deceit according to human tradition. What is the philosophy of the day? It is Marxism, it is French existentialism, and it is feminism. They all drink from the same humanistic philosophy. It's not a philosophy according to Christ, because it rejects truth, it rejects reality, it rejects nature, it rejects all that is good. It exchanges the truth of God for a lie. It throws truth into the ground. Daniel chapter 8. And our universities are the chief agent driving all of this, not just in our country, but everywhere else. That is the bottom line, folks. Our biggest problem in South Africa, according to SS statistics, is what? Fatherlessness. We are the most fatherless nation in the world. 7 out of every 10 black children are born into a fatherless home. And guess who's driving that? And guess who's excited about that future? Our universities. We are in a battle, folks. It is time to wake up, to inform yourself, and to stand for family. If you don't have a good reason to stand for family now, hopefully this morning I've given you one. Here's how you fight back against this stuff. You don't need to read all this literature. You don't need to understand Hegel. You probably couldn't understand him anyway. Nobody does, what I'm finding out. All right? But basically what we've got to try and do is stick to these things which we just take are just elementary things, like being a good mom and dad. That's how you fight this stuff. Okay, I'm done now. I didn't want this to get into a sermon. All right. By the way, I know I ran a bit long there, so no time for questions. But if you do want to have any questions, I will be out there during the tea break.